Hi guys, as you can see, two beautiful Ferraris behind me, the 308 and 328. If you're a fan of Magnum, you'll know these cars. But I am at the London Concourse. This is a car show. There's tons of beautiful stuff like this, as you'll see whilst I'm walking around doing this video. But of course, this video isn't about this event. I've already done that. Go check that out. I was here on Tuesday, 2 days ago. That video is already up on my channel. But in this video, I want to do a ULEZ update. And I thought this would be a great place to do a ULEZ update because I'm in central London. And also, I want to cover what has been going on over the last week. And of course, Sadiq Khan has been putting out new statements regarding the scrappage scheme and what's happening with that. And I think that it's worth considering whether that is actually something that is good for people that are going to be affected by the ULEZ expansion, or whether, as I believe, it's a red herring. And we'll get into that right after this.
Brown car guy. A brown car guy. Brown car guy.
So here we are, like I said, we are in the heart of London. We are at the Honourable Artillery Company. This event happens here every year. It's a beautiful concourse event, and we are actually located between Moorgate and Old Street. So really right in the middle of London. It's a beautiful day, the sun is shining. I'm breathing clean air, I think. I have to say that, but anyway, we'll get back into that. But let's talk about what's been going on, because it's been a while since I've done one of these updates. And of course, there's been some news. Sadiq Khan recently has announced that he's improving things. He's making things better. So what he's going to do is he's actually going to expand the scrappage scheme. This is what he's saying. This is how he's decided. Well, this is what he's actually been saying. This is the thing. He said he's taking action after listening to concerns over the ULEZ expansion. Well, most of us believe he's not listening to anybody or anything, but I still don't think he is, but maybe he's been told that he has to listen, or at least appear to demonstrate that he's been listening. But anyway, this is his decision. So he has been listening to these concerns, and he has basically decided that because of that, what he's going to do is he's going to expand the scrappage scheme, and that by doing that, he's going to make it available to more people. And so you think, well, how is he going to do that? Well, what he's decided to do is to open it up so that Mayor Sadiq Khan said there would be support for small businesses with fewer than 50 employees, not just sole traders and micro businesses. All families on child benefit will be offered access to the scheme. Now that really does open it to a lot of people. In fact, it's fair to say that the scrappage scheme in its original incarnation, and I've done a video on that previously, of course, and you can check that out on my channel. I'll put a link below as well. But it's fair to say that it wasn't pretty much available to nobody because it was so restrictive in how you could apply to it. So by allowing people on child benefit, or people that receive child benefit, to get onto that, that opens up to a lot more people, a considerable number of people. So that is a massive difference from where it was. There's no doubt about that. But will it actually help? Well, let's look a little bit more into this. The new eligibility for the £110 million scrappage scheme, I'll come back to that in a minute. It will be in place from the end of July. So check that out. End of July, we are in June, so end of next month. That's only a month away from the actual implementation of the ULEZ expansion, which of course is August 29th, end of August. So yeah, I mean, good luck getting that through quickly. But of course there's a grace period apparently, so that's okay. Also, the other thing he said, there's something for care workers. Now, care workers are people that I've featured on my channel. I've interviewed and talked to a few of them. And of course, they're very badly affected by this because they obviously need to get around. They mostly have cars that are non-compliant. So they are affected by it. And so what they've said, it added that the care workers needing support would be targeted for help, and that charities would be able to scrap or retrofit up to 3 vans instead of 1. Here's another thing I want to touch on, retrofit, this term retrofit. It sort of gives the impression that you can take any old car and you can make it ULEZ compliant by retrofitting it somehow. Well, thanks very much to Afzal Adam, who sent me this link, and the link was for energysavingtrust.org.uk, and I'll put the link below. Now, if you go there and you look at the link, it actually says, open up the different questions that they have, and it actually says there are currently no CVRAS approved retrofit emission control systems for pre-Euro 4 petrol cars, and we do not expect to see any come to the market in the foreseeable future. Okay, that's for petrol cars. So you think, well, okay, well, maybe we're not concerned about petrol cars. That's not what we're talking about. What about diesel cars then? Diesel cars, it says exactly the same thing. There are currently no retrofit emission control systems for pre-Euro 6 diesel cars. Pre-Euro 6, of course, are the cars that are affected, and we do not expect to see any of them come to the market in the foreseeable future. What about vans though? Now there things are a little bit different, because there are some options, but it says the systems consist of a selective catalytic reduction system added to the original diesel particulate filter, which were fitted to some Euro 5 vans. You will need to check that your van has an approved solution available, as approved systems are specific to the make and model of van. All the Euro 4 diesel vans would need both diesel particulate filters and the catalytic reduction system to become CAS or ULEZ compliant. Basically, what they're saying, there are currently no combined systems that are available to do that. That are approved for the vans. Such systems are complex to fit and can be expensive, so it may be cheaper to just buy a second-hand Euro 6 van or pay the charge. So basically they're saying you can't do it. You know, you just have to either buy a new van or just pay the charge. Now, buying a new van is absolutely ridiculous, because as we know, or as businesses know for sure, that the cost of ULEZ compliant vans has rocketed and shot through the roof. They've become almost unaffordable overnight because of ULEZ. Thank you very much, which is why a lot of businesses are struggling, and some businesses are basically threatening that they will have to go out of business because they won't be able to cover the cost. So anyway, that's to cover the concept of retrofitting, which really is a great term to just throw in there, but it's not really something that's actually feasible or doable. Now back to the story itself. A total of 874,710 families in London receive child benefit, with 578,315 of those in Outer London. So as I said, you're quite right that it will become available to more people. And of course, there's a grace period, as I also mentioned. The grace period will be given to sole traders, micro businesses with up to 10 staff, small businesses and registered charities that have bought ULEZ compliant vehicles that will not arrive until after 29th of August. So here they're also looking into the reality of the fact that if you try and buy a new vehicle, they have very long waiting lists. And this has been the case for some time now, post-pandemic. It's gotten a little bit better now, it's eased off a little bit, but with vans it's particularly difficult right now still. And we're looking at waiting times for up to 18 months or more on some of these vehicles. So it isn't a case of simply buying a ULEZ compliant new vehicle and just driving it home the next day or whatever. It's not going to happen. So they've thought that and they put that in, and they're going, okay, well, we'll give you a little bit of a grace period. However, and this is the BBC saying this, the adjustments, these adjustments that have now been added to the Scrappage scheme, basically do not increase the fund. So the £110 million fund that was made available for Scrappage is still only 110 million. So even though all of a sudden you've opened this up to so many more people, allegedly to help them move into ULEZ compliant cars, well, you can't, because the amount of money that's available is still the same. There are 280,000 cars registered in addresses in Outer London that are non-ULEZ compliant according to TfL. And as we know, we've covered in previous videos, etc., that's not really the case. There are more people, and of course there are people in Outer London which don't come into that, but which will be affected by ULEZ, that are not included in that. And the number of cars that are going to be impacted by the ULEZ expansion is clearly much higher than 280,000. But okay, let's stick with the 280,000. Which again is worth saying that if it is only 280,000, then why are we even bothering? Why are we bothering when the fact that we have to spend, with the infrastructure in place and with the Scrappage scheme, a combined total of over £350 million to put into a place that will only impact or only essentially try to remove 280,000 cars. I've covered this before. I've covered also the rate of change to newer cars in a previous video. Go check it out. It doesn't make any sense, because we know that actually there's a lot more cars affected than they're saying. But anyway, here's the BBC have also crunched numbers for us. Thank you very much. They're very kind of you. But what they figured out is that if you took that 110 million and you gave it to car owners, all the people that you've now said are eligible and you're going to help them, remember what we've said, 280,000 cars are affected, but only 55,000 of those owners would actually be helped with the entire 110 million pounds. So that's not even a quarter of the total amount. And then if you just look at vans, because vans of course are the most seriously affected because they are all diesel and tend to be older vans. And when I say older, I don't mean that they're clapped out pieces of junk. I mean we're talking 2014, 2013, something like that. I'll come back to that as well in a minute. Anyway, there's 80,000 vans that are non-compliant, is what they're saying. That's nearly half of the vans registered to addresses in outer London. So again, it gives a lie to the 10% number, doesn't it? Because like 50% of vans registered to addresses or businesses in outer London are actually non-compliant. If you gave all of that £110 million scrappage money to those businesses, only 25,000 of those vans, I was going to say 25,000 of those vans would be replaced, but they can't be replaced because the cost of buying is much, much higher. So what we can say is that only 25,000 of those owners would be helped by the scrappage scheme. There wouldn't be any more money than that. So that's not even half. So, that doesn't really help anyway. Now, there's one aspect of this thing about Sadiq Khan going, oh, okay, I need to make this look a little bit better than how it's been looking. He knows that there's a lot of hate for him as a mayor. He knows there's a lot of hate for the ULEZ expansion. And one of the things that he said was in the Standard, I think it was yesterday or the day before, and again, I'll put the link below, Sadiq Khan has suggested that the air quality of cities around the world is at stake if his plan to expand the ULEZ ultra-low emission zone fails to go ahead. The Mayor of London told an audience of scientists on Tuesday that London was leading the way internationally in the battle against air pollution, but that other cities would grow nervous about taking their own measures if ULEZ doesn't expand. So basically what he's saying there is that, as we know and as we've discussed in previous videos, he is obviously chair of C40 Cities, and that is basically a group of mayors from around the world of major cities, such as here, obviously London, he's part of that, also mayor of New York, I believe, but also other countries like India and Africa and other places. And what he's saying there is that if we don't do this, they won't do it, or they won't be inspired to do it. But what he's actually saying is that because he's the chair of C40's groups, he's basically going to lose face if he doesn't do it, because he said he was going to do it, and if he doesn't do it, he's going to lose face, he's going to lose his position as chair, rather than this whole thing about, oh, I'll fail to inspire other cities to do it. Other cities have their own problems. Don't forget, we already have ULEZ in central London. Some of those other cities we're talking about, they don't have anything. New York, Manhattan is only now starting to think about introducing a form of ULEZ into Manhattan, right? So they don't even have anything. We're talking about an expansion. Why the hell do we have to have an expansion to inspire other cities to clean up their act when actually outer London is relatively clean? And also London, I'll come back to that as well in a minute. In fact, let's tackle that right now. Let's tackle the fact that I actually grew up not far from here. So we are, like I said, between Moorgate and Old Street. Just down from Old Street, I grew up here in Islington, just down the road from here. And I am 54 years old. So I've been around a while. I grew up here in the 70s. Now let's look at this data that is from, I think it was reported in The Spectator. Now, since 1970, the air has become a lot cleaner. In fact, sulfur dioxide is down 97%. Non-methane volatile organic compounds are down 66%. Now, the two things that the ULEZ is most concerned about is NOx, nitrogen oxide, and particulate emissions. Nitrogen oxide is down 72%. And particulate emissions, so PM10 and PM2.5, so PM10 is down 73% and PM2.5 is down 79%. So you can see that there's a significant cleaning up of the air since, for example, I was a kid, since I was 2 years old, if you like. They say that there's deaths according to pollution. Again, there's that 4,000 figure. I've covered that in previous videos. It's just an extrapolated, estimated, calculated figure that doesn't actually relate to reality in any sense whatsoever. And then, of course, there's that one death that is said to be recorded due to pollution. It's interesting because the Spectator said that there's that one death, and even that Khan suspected that the car fumes had caused that death. But the coroner had dismissed this possibility. The verdict was then quashed, and a second inquest was initiated, securing the desired result. It's what's said in The Spectator. So that's interesting, isn't it? So even there's a huge amount of doubt as to whether or not that was actually the case. And actually, if you do a freedom of information request on that, on how many deaths are caused by car pollution, then even that, and I've covered this in the previous video as well, even that returns the answer that There's one death recorded in a 20-year period resulting from pollution, but it is not directly linked or cannot be directly linked to pollution from cars. Now, listen, I'm not saying that pollution for cars is great for us. I'm not going to sit here and breathe up exhaust fumes. Although this is the thing, I have been doing most of my life. You know, I've been covering cars, doing car content for 30 years. Before that, I was a car fan. I've been around cars the whole time. I've covered events, covered a couple of car things like this. I've been to racing events. When I was in the UAE, I've lived in big cities all the time. We lived in London, lived in Jeddah, which is a port city in Saudi Arabia. Lived in Dubai, which has got terrible pollution actually, believe it or not. But you know, that's how it is. I covered the UAE drift scene, the drift championship for 3 years, and that involved sometimes standing in the middle of the drift arena as cars were drifting around you. I'd go home and I'd be scraping black off my face because of all the tire stuff that would come and stick to you. And the gunge, I would just, that's how much I was exposed to this stuff. Praise the Lord, thank God, I'm absolutely no issues whatsoever. I have no long-term health issues. I get the odd headache every now and then, but I've always had that. But other than that, I've got no health issues whatsoever. I mean, the reality is that different things affect people differently. And this is another problem with the whole ULEZ thing. The idea that this level of pollution that affects one person, or maybe he believes has given him asthma, will give everybody asthma. If that was the case, then any scientist will tell you there has to be a control experiment, right? To show that, to prove beyond doubt that this is an impact of something. So if you're saying that this gives you asthma or whatever, then everybody in London should have it. I've grown up in these situations, I haven't got it. Anyway, moving on, the scrappage scheme. Let's talk a little bit more about that. And the reality is that I hate scrappage schemes. I'm completely against scrappage schemes, and the reason I say that is because A, they won't really help you. I mean, the money, $2,000, that's not going to buy you a ULEZ. I mean, it's going to buy you a ULEZ compliant car. It is, let's be honest, you can get it, but right now, prices are rocketing, and what can you hope to get for that? You'll probably get an older petrol car. That's what you'll end up getting. So let's paint a picture, let's paint a scenario, let's paint a typical scenario. The kind of people that are being forced out of this, and especially when they said that people on child benefit will get this opportunity. So most of those families have got diesel cars, diesel SUVs, which are larger and good mileage. And they might be 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. They're relatively new cars. They've got loads of miles left in them. What you're saying is get rid of those cars. What you're saying is scrap those cars. If you're wise, you won't scrap that car. In fact, you should not sell your car. If you check my other videos, I've said don't buy or sell at this time. You will lose money on your car and you will pay too much for your next car. But anyway, the reality is that those cars, if you got rid of those cars, what would you get, whether you scrapped it or whether you sold it? Scrapping it would be a waste. Like I said, so much life left in those cars. Come back to that in a minute. But what would you get? What you'd end up with is an older petrol car. So you'd end up with like a 2004, 2005 petrol, especially if you spend £2,000, the budget they've given you. If you spent that, you would end up with like a 2004, 2005 petrol car, a much smaller car than what you had, which wouldn't necessarily meet you or your family's needs. So that is where we have a big problem. And then if you look at the scrappage schemes and what it's cost to the car community, and look around me, look what's going on here, and look at these beautiful old cars that you see behind me. You saw some Renault 5s earlier there, saw a nice G model, G-body Porsche 911 there, and you see these cars, and they're creating this environment, they're creating this culture, they're creating an opportunity for investment, for enjoyment. They can still be driven around. I drive my 1989 E30 as a regular car, and the older cars, I've always said this, and I will continue to say this, is that they're the best cars for the environment. Unfortunately, scrappage schemes kill a lot of these older cars, and they do it with mercilessly. And some great cars. So for example, I did this video earlier and a few months back, and I'll put the link below. But for example, in the last scrappage scheme, a lot of great, amazing classics were lost. So for example, the BMW 2002, the Audi Quattro, an absolute legend of a car, 9 Triumph Spitfires, several MG midgets, 731 classic Jaguars were lost, including 45 of the XJ models. If you remember when the Saint returned, the return of the Saint, when Simon Temple was played by Ian Ogilvy and he drove that white Jaguar XJS, I had a Corgi model of that. Those cars, we lost 45 of those cars. Moved to a slightly more modern metal. We lost the Honda Integra Type R. We lost Ford Capris, and they're worth a lot of money, highly collectible now. Lancia Deltas, Fiat X19s, and even Mercedes S-Classes. Amazing cars. Now let's just look at classic cars for a minute. And people talk about old cars, they're so polluting. Classic cars, on average, put out an annual CO2 of about half a ton, about 500 kilograms. That's it, because they don't get used that much. So the average CO2 emissions is much lower. Even if they were used more, don't forget, they have paid their carbon dues over and over again, and they're just being run, you know? So it's only the cost of keeping them on the road. That's it, right? Now, if you were to replace them, you buy a new car. A new car has an average CO2 footprint of 4.5 tons. Just to get it made and delivered to you is 5.5 tons. So to replace your old car, so if you keep your car running, say if you're running it regularly as an old car, 4.5 tons, if you want to replace it, you scrap that car, so it's the carbon footprint of scrapping the car, and then the carbon footprint of getting the new car is 5.5 tons, so it's immediately 1 ton up, plus whatever the cost was of actually scrapping that car. So that's a complete nightmare. So then what about electric cars? So you go, well, we already know, and this is just something really interesting has happened here. Because last year, if you Googled what was the carbon footprint of building a brand new EV, you would have found a figure of 26 tons. And that figure came from Volvo. And Volvo has no reason to mislead people, because Volvo has actually got a separate brand, Polestar, that is entirely electric, and Volvo itself is spending, both across that brand and its own brand, a huge amount of money in electric vehicles. So it has no incentive to put people off EVs. And by the way, I'm not anti-EV, and I'm not trying to put anyone off EVs either. I think they're fantastic cars, and for the right people in the right circumstances, they are the perfect car. But keep in mind, a new EV at that time was reported to be 26 tons to produce. Strangely, bizarrely, I'm not being a conspiracy theorist here, but strangely, bizarrely, that figure has not so easily available on the internet anymore. So it's been taken down or something. Something's happened there. But okay, the figure that you can find is 9.9 tons. That's still double what a petrol car, a new petrol car carbon footprint is. So it's still considerably more. And so you're still looking at much longer lead times, or much longer times to run that car in order to neutralize the carbon impact of building the car. So, you know, you get what I'm saying. So it's times 2 worse than a petrol car, although previously times 3 and 4. The true figure is somewhere in between. Don't forget the bigger EVs, the ones that are coming out in America, the big F-150s and all these other things. I mean, you're talking about 30 tons to produce those. And that tonnage comes from the raw materials that are needed to put those cars together. So that's what kind of happens there. So one thing I will just finish on, electric cars actually are good for humans. They do have zero emissions, but ultimately because of the carbon footprint and because of how the energy is used or drawn to charge those cars, they're not necessarily that great for the environment. So we've got to think very carefully before we say things like, let's just replace all of the cars with EVs, that's going to help everything. It's not. It's going to be an environmental catastrophe. That's what it's going to be. So scrappage schemes also, I believe, are an environmental catastrophe, because you're wasting, if you look at an older car, it's paid its carbon dues, it already has. Right? If you scrap it, you're basically wasting all of all of the work that's already been done to keep that car on the road. I don't believe a car should be scrapped unless it is completely and utterly beyond hope, beyond help. It's only at that point should you go, okay, maybe we should scrap this car. I've only ever scrapped one car in my life. It was years ago, it was the days before the internet. The car had been in a crash and I just couldn't get the bits and pieces to get it repaired. And unfortunately, I had to scrap it. I regretted doing it now. I regret it even more now. I wish I'd never done it, because the car still had life left in it. Even if you get to the point where the car is beyond help, even then don't scrap it. Because if you look around here and you look at all these old cars, all the old Aston Martins, you probably won't have an old Aston Martin, possibly. But although, having said that, what I was going to say is that even if your car is beyond help, cannibalize it for parts, because these parts will help keep other cars on the road. With classic cars, we're getting to a point now where a lot of the things are not available anymore. You have to remanufacture them. So there's a carbon footprint of remanufacturing those things, whereas you could take existing cars and get the parts out and resell them, reuse them, recycle them. The best thing for the environment, of course, is recycling. So it doesn't make sense to scrap these cars. I've covered pretty much what I wanted to cover. The reality is that scrappage schemes don't make any sense. And what we've got to keep in mind is that although this is now being sold to us as the perfect, look at this, propeller car. Isn't that amazing? And that actually runs. That's incredible, isn't it? And it's being sold to us that, the scrappage scheme is the answer to all the problems. It is not. It's going to make things worse, because you're taking perfectly good cars off the road unnecessarily. And even when they say scrap it, they don't scrap them properly. They just leave them in the field to rot. That's not helping anybody. And then you build new cars to replace them, and that is worse for the environment. It is not the answer. Do not be taken in by this new solution from the mayor. It's not even really a solution because it won't really help enough people that are actually going to need the help, because there isn't actually even enough money in it, and even if they get the money, they can't buy the cars that they need in order to comply with ULEZ. So more coming on this, stay tuned, we'll keep up to date with this. Some of you have asked me to promote or tell you about the protest events that happen. Now the problem with that is, and this is a good problem, it's a good problem to have, is that there's now more of these events than there were ever before. And it's too many for me to keep up with now. It's just, there's lots of them going on. There's lots of individual pocket events, satellite events that are going on in and around London. The best thing to do is to go and sign up. There's two major Facebook, there's lots of Facebook pages, but there's two major Facebook groups. If you just search for Action Against ULEZ in Facebook, then you find these two major groups. Make sure you sign up to those, and of course your local area group as well. And in there you'll be able to find out all of the events that are going on. The main one that I know about, the next major one that I know about, I believe is happening on the 25th of June in Marble Arch in central London. I'm probably going to go to that one, so I hope to see you there. Thanks so much for watching. Catch you in the next video.
Brown car guy.
Hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please hit the like button and share this video as well if you can. And while you're at it, check out these guys who also sponsor my content. I am deeply grateful to them because it helps me to buy new equipment, put fuel in the cars, and yes, buy a cup of coffee. You can do the same. Just go here or right here on YouTube. Just hit these three little dots down here and click on thanks. Make sure you're signed in first. My content is free, but this is how you can help me keep it that way. I may even send you a gift. Oh, by the way, watch this next.